E85, man. Did I make a freaking huge mistake going E85?
And the battery's dead. Gotta love it. Oh, that only took about 12 tries and a jumper pack. E85 life.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the starting issues I've experienced in my 8th gen turbo Honda Civic R18 motor once we converted to full E85. We have been running E85 for about 3 months. Full E85 at this point, we are reading about E82, E83 from the pump. Great octane, for great ethanol percentage from the pump, and the car likes it. We've been tuning it and adding more ignition timing and making that jam. But the jam is fun when the car starts, because once we went full E85, we've had a lot of starting issues. So in this video, I'm going to be compiling some of the videos I have trying to start this car in the morning. We've started running E85 in the early spring when temperatures were anywhere from 30, 40 to 50 degrees, and cold weather with ethanol isn't that great. But was there more to it than just the cold weather that was causing my car not to start? Well, stick around for this video and you'll see what problems I was having with this E85 and what really was the problem. Was it the fuel? Was it something else? Man, I was losing my head chasing something. We managed to solve the issue, so right now we are still continuing to use E85 in the turbo Civic. So the battery's off, the tray is off. This is what we are seeing, and on the intake cold side, I actually did have a pipe, a vacuum source, when I had my oil catch can connected a certain way. But since then I changed my oil catch can setup, and I will not be using the vacuum side of the cold side anymore. So I'm gonna disconnect this hose that's just been chilling here during the winter, and I am gonna block that off. And good news, my battery cover has been found. I'm glad I found it, because I hated how it looked like without the battery cover here on this. So what I'm gonna do, I'm also just gonna ground some of these wires here for the battery connection. There's a couple grounds here. I'm gonna just sand all this off and just make sure I got a nice solid connection so my cold starts are a little bit better. I do have a little battery terminal cleaner here. Get some fresh metal right there. I also took out both ground wires. As you can see, that is pretty rusty, so I'm going to be cleaning them off. And this one's like about falling apart, so we're actually going to run some hot water through it to get rid of some of the corrosion, grind some of these edges so it gets a fresh metal surface, and should be good. I'm also going to be grinding off these areas here. Alright, the battery terminals nice and rough. I also utilized this part of the tool to clean inside that terminal clamp, and you can see fresh copper, as before you did not see fresh copper. Same thing, you can see that fresh copper right there inside. So cleaned up all the surfaces So you got fresh copper everywhere. So that is going to be one extra bonus. Cleaned out the, like, pretty much sanded and used a stainless steel brush to get to the bare metal, both over here on the chassis, over here on the side chassis, and went over with the wire wheel on the transmission bracket. So that is all going to give me better grounds. There is also a ground right over here and in the chassis, and I'm going to tackle that too. I took the cover off of this and I wire wheeled it, and it looks much better, but there's still some crevices where there's some corrosion. So what not better than the old trick of just hot water. All right guys, so I pretty much did all the grounds, resurfaced all the pretty much the surfaces, cleaned the copper wire. Full E85 turbo R18 Honda Civic. I've had a hell of a time starting this car on E85, so I just recently regrounded every single piece on the battery system, and we're gonna try testing it. We're gonna try starting it up here and testing it. E85, man, I had a battery tender on the car. It won't start with this jumper, so now I got this jumper, and the battery tender all hooked up. And I mean, this is kind of getting ridiculous at this point, trying to start this car. See, it's just not turning over. I mean, that can't be a battery issue. That's gotta be a freaking starter. All right, so we've had a lot going on with this car lately. With the E85, you know, we went full E85 on the turbo Honda Civic R18. And, you know, over the last couple of weeks, as I've been using E85, we had more and more problems starting the car. You know, at first it went from the ethanol content first went from E75, I believe. And then later in a couple weeks it went to E83, and that ethanol content just made everything worse to start. The temperatures here in the Midwest have been anywhere from 30 degrees to 50 degrees in the morning, and it's just not doing that well. I'm cranking a lot, you know. I'll make a whole video on that. And long story short, I had 3 jumpers on here. I had a doctor's appointment in the morning, and this thing would not turn over. As soon as I went under the car, hit it a few times on the starter, cranked it, it started, which leads me to where we are right now. I pulled the factory starter out of the vehicle, 123,000 miles on it, and the culprit, I believe, at this point in time, I don't think it's the battery. I don't really think it's the fuel anymore. I think it's just the starter that's been on its way out for a couple of weeks now. And as I said, it's been getting worse and worse. So I did take this starter to AutoZone, and I did have them test it to make sure it is working. And the AutoZone I went to pretty much said this thing is dead. It even smelled when they were trying to jump it to crank it over. So we ordered a new one, and this is the Iron Tree brand off of Amazon. Yes, this is a Amazon starter. It had good reviews. It supposedly has a 2-year warranty, and it cost me $70 shipped overnight. $75, $76, which is a steal. AutoZone wanted $155, and Honda wanted around $580, which is just nuts. So we're gonna see how the Iron Tree does. The installation of these guys, it's not the easiest installation. I did take off, if you can see right there, I did take off the S pipe, and I was gonna pull the axle, but I decided not to pull the axle. I got around doing it. Took me about an hour or so to get off I'm familiar with this car quite a bit. I've had people online say it took them 5-6 hours for the job. Well, hopefully it goes back in just as smooth as it went out, and hopefully this solves our cranking issue on the 8th gen Turbo Civic full E85. But yeah, the starters look pretty much identical. Everything is positioned the right way. Maybe one of the brackets is just a hair off or different, but I don't see that being a terrible. So you see this bracket on the OEM one is just short, and this bracket has like a L bracket. So we might have to just bend this bracket slightly to match this one, and that's pretty much the only difference that I see. Intake manifold is right here. It's hard to freaking get those wiring off of there. All right, we got the starter installed, battery terminals connected. I didn't touch everything up downstairs with the starter. I'm just gonna, it's powered on, it's grounded obviously, and this is gonna be the first startup on the Amazon starter. If it starts, I'm happy, we're good. It definitely is cranking. It might be just the E85 content again. There we go. So I'm probably gonna play around with the fuel map again now that we know it was a starter issue. Pretty much we're gonna let it warm up. Once it's warmed up, I'll crank it again. If it starts good, starter looks good. I mean, definitely seems punchy and a lot more willing to start and crank compared to the old starter. So I think now all I have to do is adjust my fuel map again and add more cranking fuel, and I think all in all it should be better. Kind of concluded that this is most likely a starter issue. That same day I took that starter off, I had my brother order me a new starter on Amazon. Believe it or not, we are using the Amazon starter, which is crazy. It was about $75, way cheaper than AutoZone, way cheaper than what Honda quoted me for, which was an absurd price. And we installed it the next day when it came, and that starter has been working flawlessly. The install was quite tedious. It was actually harder installing that starter back in compared to then just taking it out. But since we installed that starter, we just dialed in the cold cranking fuel tables for E85, and the starting is much better and consistent. The car just wants to crank and start, whereas before sometimes it just would try to crank once or twice and die. So all in all, at the end of the day, it was a starter issue. So it was I had the original starter since I bought the car, and it went out at 124,000 miles. We did go to AutoZone to test that starter just to make sure, and they said that thing was completely fried. It even smelled and didn't want to crank over when they were testing it. And it's been about 3 to 4 weeks since I installed that starter, and my initial impressions are great. The car starts just about every single time. It'll crank over and crank over. There's no issues whatsoever. So for $70 and a 2-year warranty from Amazon, so far no regrets on the purchase. from the Amazon starter. I'll let you guys know maybe a long-term update if you are interested. But a lot of people on Amazon comments were saying they installed this on the 8th gen Civic, so I had some confidence behind buying this item. And yeah, no issues so far. Save yourself a lot of money. It just sounds a little different when you're cranking it compared to your factory starter, but other than that, everything works great. So I am continuing to use E85 for the next couple of months, but once it starts probably going below 50 or 45 degrees in the mornings, I'm probably gonna go back to 93 octane for the fall and the winter, as again, we don't want to wear this starter out prematurely. But again, if you run E85, you may have problems with the starter because a lot of people have cranking issues, and E85 requires you to crank the car more than running gasoline. So that's something to be cautious of. Maybe even put it in your to-do list when you switch to full E85. And again, just make sure you're tuning the fuel tables for E85 appropriately. E85 requires way more fuel, about 30-35% off the bat, and the cranking fuel for cold starts, it requires even more than that. So talk to a tuner, experiment, do whatever you got to do. I'm finding out the hard way on tuning E85 because I got no resources or buddies or anything, but we managed to get it dialed in for the most part. I'm still having some hiccups when I turn the car on, believe it or not. When I restart the car, when it's warm, it kind of stutters a little bit when it's warm on a warm start, but we're tuning that slowly and getting it dialed in as well. All right, well, that's pretty much a wrap for this video. Thanks for holding through to the end. If you did watch it all the way to the end, type in R18A1 for the boys. See you on the next one.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane, I'ma do it all for you. Come along and see it's true, but the world is pretty cold. You might need a sweater too. I'ma put a ride on ya. Kid from California, trying to make it in life. In school they never taught ya. Dreams of my